We're going to be live.
Yes.
We're actually live on our Facebook.
Wonderful. Ambassador, we're starting. Good. Hello, everyone joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is our 7th series of Youth in Diplomacy Talks. Today our special guest is Ambassador Webson, who will be introduced by Esma later on. My name is Lika Torikashvili. Together with Ramiz Bakhtiar, I'm one of the founders of this network. Ambassador, I would like to tell you a little bit about the network, and Ramiz will tell you a little bit more about Youth in Diplomacy Talks initiative before we start our conversation. The network was started during the global pandemic. It was a year after our mandates at the UN finished as youth delegates, when Ramiz and I realized that there is a huge potential lost when youth delegates are not connected to each other and when they stop being connected to the United Nations after their mandates are over, because we all have a lot of experience, expertise. We are focal points with the youth in our countries. We collect a lot of information, and then after our mandates are over, it's finished, which is not sustainable. So that's how the idea was born, to create an organization which will put together all youth delegates from different years, from different countries, so that together we can work for a global impact. And it started at a very difficult time when everyone was locked in their houses, when we were unable to go out and communicate with our friends. And actually, I think we did our best with the time that we had locked in our houses. We started connecting with fellows from different countries online, and realized that in this new digital world, a lot can be done easier through online platforms, which is also one of the reasons why we started Youth in Diplomacy Talks. But right now we've been born for a year already, and we're doing a lot of work on different SDGs worldwide. And Ramiz will tell you more about Youth in Diplomacy Talks, which is also one of our initiatives. Ramiz, to you.
Thank you very much, Lika. Thank you, Ambassador, for accepting our invitation. As Lika mentioned, it's our 7th Youth in Diplomacy Talks. It's one of our projects in the network of former youth delegates to the United Nations. I'm a former UN youth delegate of Afghanistan, but I'm currently based in Canada. Together with Lika, I'm a founder of the network. With Youth in Diplomacy Talks, we are trying to evolve the traditional and common practice of diplomacy, because we believe that today young people can play a vital role in representing their countries and representing the values of their countries, and also connect with other young leaders from other parts of the world. This connection is important because it can lead to partnership. And when young people partner and work together, they can make a real change. Young people are disappointed at the way politicians are exercising leadership. That's why they're stepping in to make a difference. And we are providing them with a platform to connect with UN ambassadors, to bring young people closer to the United Nations. As Lika mentioned, we have the experience of being UN youth representatives of our countries. And we have talked to over hundreds of UN youth delegates from different countries and generations, and some of them even were not able to have a discussion or a meeting with their own UN ambassador. And we try to bridge that. We are bridging that through Youth in Diplomacy Talks. We have had our Youth in Diplomacy Talks with 6 UN ambassadors so far. This is our 7th Youth in Diplomacy Talks in honor of International Human Rights Day. And my colleague Isma will be moderating this talk with Ambassador Webson. When today is Human Rights Day, and as I mentioned before, I'm originally from Afghanistan, and the situation going on in my country is worrying me. It's concerning me. There are reports of grave violations of human rights. A few weeks ago, we wrote a letter to the UN Secretary General, an open letter to the UN Secretary General in regards to the human rights situation in Afghanistan. It was endorsed by 20 organizations globally from around the world and signed by over 150 human rights activists from around the world. And we have received a response from the Secretary General's office, and we're glad that the Human Rights Council has adopted a resolution to create a special rapporteur to monitor the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. As young leaders coming from different parts of the world, we care about the situation of human rights, not only in Afghanistan, but globally. With that, Isma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ramis. Thank you, Lika, very much. Actually, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's never boring to listen to these introductions, though I have listened and I have heard them a few times before, as I was, of course, attending the events, the Youth and Diplomacy Talk series. I was co-facilitating some of them, as I myself also am a former Georgia's youth representative to the United Nations and one of the co-founders of this great network. Just listening to this again, a part of how big things I am makes me really humble. Today, as Ramis already has mentioned, we are dedicating our today's talk to the International Human Rights Day, which is the 73rd anniversary of the passage of UN Declaration of Universal Human Rights. And this document has been alive and relevant all throughout this history. And of course, when we passed it, we probably, and our ancestors probably thought that they did the job and that it was over. However, unfortunately, it turned out that human rights did not include all the people who were really meant by this convention, by this declaration. And therefore, another conventions became necessary, such as CEDAW Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to name just a few. To name the very groups of people who are historically more marginalized and who experience more adverse effects of discrimination. Here in Georgia, when I was conducting my regional tours and meeting young people, I have been asking them to name one human rights defender. The person who they usually would name would be always male, always very privileged, coming from a socially, ethnically, and religiously mainstream and, let's say, majority background, without disability, unfortunately, and so on. So this once again shows that if we do not put emphasis on specific people and specific groups of people when we speak about human rights, this will remain a very generalized talk. And this is why today we invited Ambassador Webson, a permanent representative to the United Nations of Antigua and Barbuda. Ambassador Webson has been, prior to his appointment as of ambassador, he has been serving as a chief executive officer at Perkins International and some other major international non-governmental organizations that work on the rights of persons with disabilities and on their inclusion into the society. Upon his appointment as of the permanent representative, he has been a president of UNICEF and also a president of the board of the UNDP and a chairperson of the steering committee on accessibility within the United Nations and few other initiatives. Ambassador Webson has worked on issues such as climate change, the adverse effects of hurricanes on the Caribbean, and with different types of diseases and medical conditions. So Ambassador, on this day, of persons of the human rights, we would really be interested to hear more of your perspective on human rights issues, on inclusion of different groups of people and of our different needs and specific needs that we all face, as well as on youth inclusion, and also how does inclusion of people come together with environmental protection and climate change. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ezra. And thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much, and very interesting introduction by your colleague. And I am honored to be invited to be part of this discussion. I'm particularly honored to join the other ambassadors and leaders from within the UN system with whom you have had dialogue and conversations with on this subject. And I look forward more to the question and answers, this section, than I am to, of course, giving you any sort of verbose presentation. Friends, but that's what I see you as young people with whom the world, for whom the world holds all of the future and the promises. We, as at the United Nations, made a promise back in 2015 to leave no one behind. The commitment to that promise was made by those of us who were fortunate to be sitting in a seat that allowed us to do that. The implication of that promise is supposed to be given to the opportunities that are created for all human beings. And the application of that promise is to be carried out by the governments that signed on to this. But they want to do due diligence to ensure that that promise is kept, the young people of our world, because it is the youth for whom that promise was explicitly made in order that this world can be much more an equal place to be. The Human Rights Declaration, friends, as you have been saying, was made in 1948 by our forefathers. They made it then with the explicit hope that the conditions outlined and enshrined in that document will be followed for all mankind. I, as a person of color, a Black Afro-Caribbean person, a son of whose grandparents, great-grandparents were slaves, I understand what is meant by denying the right. Today, we know that in many stories that are told, history, as you know, is written by the victors. And in many, many books, the history of the Black people of many societies is not told. How they got to the Caribbean, how we got to the Americas, is not told. And in many parts of countries, it is refused to be told. So I understand that. I, as a person with disability, understand what marginalization is because I am blind. And I have grown up in a society, in a world where, as a blind person or a person who is blind, I have had to always seek to do better than the best in order to be able to be given even the slightest of opportunities. Nothing to do with my ability, but everything to do with my disability, which has been used to marginalize people like myself and many millions of children, adults, and persons in our community. That's the kind of thing that the Human Rights Charter did not bargain for, did not allow at the time. They did not see persons with disability. And I can tell you stories of my own life and advocacy to get persons with disability. But today I want to spend a few minutes on 4 areas of human rights that touches the lives of each one of us in the audience here. I want to speak about what the Human Rights Charter averts, and the aspirations of the Charter. I want to look at the standards of living that it was set up to be, because the Human Rights Charter was designed to be a force for good. And while it was an international charter built at the United Nations, its application must be at the national level and must be at the community level and must be the respect of every citizen of every country. It's not legally binding, but we are all committed to it as a people. So I want to talk a little bit about gender and human rights, a little bit about COVID-19 and its intrusion on human rights, a little bit about climate and human rights, and then return to disability and human rights. Let me begin with human rights and gender equity, for this is a pervasive scourge on our communities and our society and in general on our world. We know that if you are a woman, and I will add, if you are a woman with disability, if you are a woman, you are doubly disadvantaged in most societies, if not all. If you're a woman with disability, you are triple disadvantaged and more, simply by being a woman, and further by being a woman with disability. Human Rights Day, you probably noticed, follows this since 2011, has followed the 16 days that have been declared as you know, with the orange for gender action, that globally, right? And for against violence against women. In our world today, I just lost my position here. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. In our world today, we have significant gender violence everywhere. In many countries, the violence against women has become almost a norm. Rape, just simply domestic violence. And these are some of the most invasive challenges that, no matter how small the society, don't matter how big the society is, that is something that we face as other people, and we have to address that. We cannot continue, despite the laws we make. We cannot just simply make laws. We have to find ways to address this. And this is possibly one of the most important challenges that we as a global society face, and that is to beat back and bring a redress to the violence against women in our community. I can I can go on and on with this because this is one of the things that I personally feel very strong. So, you know, I just want to draw you to some figures. Recent figures show that unbelievably, 7 out of 10 women would have been affected in violence in some societies. 7 out of 10. Any other society, that's just not acceptable. So we have to find ways to begin to say no against violence. We have to find ways to make sure that this is not something that we can continue to give action to in our societies. I am sure you would have more questions on that. So I'll come back to that. But just to acknowledge that there is a lot of United Nations action that is being called for to address this scourge. UNFPA is one of the leaders in the fight against women and violence. UN Women, obviously, is another. In the Caribbean, we have Say No. We have one Caribbean, one woman. We have one Caribbean woman. We have also a number of other UN activities and organizations that are doing innovative things to address this. Equally important to address the question of violence is the question of how we raise our boys and how we deal with our boys. We are losing young men in many of our societies, in my part of the world, to drugs, to other forms of society ills. And if we don't address those, we won't correct the question of violence against women. Now, let's talk a little bit about human rights and the COVID-19 pandemic, because I know many would wonder, well, what does this have to do with human rights? I want to raise 2 issues, one international and one that affects at the local level. So you have heard a lot about vaccine hoarding and vaccine nationalism, and the denial of vaccines from societies like mine is a scourge on human rights. That when we can fix and address the question of COVID-19 in some parts of the world, but we cannot address it in others because we won't, that is an issue of human rights. This pandemic has brought us to a major crossroad. We either have to take the road of collective action, because we cannot go separately and deal with it as individual nations, because it will not be cured unless we are all cured. This is one of those crossroad moments in our world where we have to come together. We have seen communities rally around each other to act because of food shortages, because of because of the many challenges of families had for burying their dead. We have seen communities act and come together. We have to see that collective action at the international level as well. It is critical in times like these that this is a seismic shift in the paradigm of our global collective action. And we have to seize this moment. We have to return to a much more of a global community than we operate. If we continue, we will not get rid of the pandemic. Having said that, we are also at a very interesting crossroads in applying conditions to secure national health boundaries. And that's very important to pay very close attention to. You may recall, and some of you may be too young to even recall, after 9/11, we had the war on terror. We instituted a lot of rules about organization, how people should come together, how many people can be gathered together, how many people can do this or that as groups. And we began to deny rights, liberty, civil liberty rights, based on the fact that we were controlling the war on terror. You would also recall many countries used the war on terror to control populations. So there were states of emergencies. There were strict laws about about organizing and how you can organize, whether it was in groups or how many people were allowed to come. We have to be very careful that we do not use the health controls mechanism to now control the human rights of people. And it's a very delicate dancing or balancing act, one that we need to pay some attention to as civil liberty activists. If we, as we try to attempt to go back to COVID-19 and some of the collective response in our societies, we need to make sure that our target in our responses identify those most vulnerable communities, persons with disability, single women, single mothers, families in many communities, religious or marginalized groups, and so on. So this gives us that opportunity to refocus, rekindle, and start. Let me quickly talk about climate. Now, climate and this climate and human rights. When we went to Glasgow, and I was in Glasgow leading the Small Island States. I'm the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. The Small Island States went to Glasgow with the hope and expectation that the larger countries would do more to help us basically stay alive. The 20 largest countries in the world are the most, commit the greatest harm to our environment. And we are, as a community, attempting, as we use Glasgow as that platform coming out of the Paris Agreement of 2015, to begin to see if we can get countries to be less, to emit less, and to be more committed to global financing towards addressing the questions of climate and saving our environment and our planet, to reduce the pollution in our marine biosphere, because, as you know, for many of our islands, marine life is our life. We came out of Glasgow with some concessions. But what we clearly have to understand and link is that failure to respond to these issues is a human rights challenge to the global community. Because if we do not address the question by the great emitters, we continue to have sea level rise. What happens when we have sea level rise? That whole communities, whole islands are in danger of disappearing. And I mean literally disappearing. My sister island, in 30 to 50 years, if we do not pull back, will disappear because it's flat. It's below sea level. The islands in the Pacific that are already feeling the effect of sea level rise and are beginning to get small and smaller. And their populations are already making arrangements to be relocated in another country. That can't be right. We are, and it is because we do not collectively address the problem as a global community. So climate, and human rights goes together, goes hand in hand. And we have to begin to see these things and link them together. The biggest support for climate action in the world are the young people. And we need young people to continue to stand up and hold global governance to the fire, their feet to the fire, to say, you cannot destroy our world because our future, our world will be no more if you continue to be as greedy and as carefree as you have been for the last how many ever years. So we count on young people to do that. I just want to now speak a little bit to human rights and disability. I began by saying we promised as the United Nations to leave no one behind. And I take that very seriously myself, really seriously. I believe that we ought to, it is a mantra that should be the global theme of action in everything we do. I believe that we cannot reach global parity and equality without making sure that no one is left out, regardless of disability, color, etc. And persons with disability are the ones that are in most danger of being left behind. Being left behind in the climate war, being left behind in the COVID recovery struggle, being left behind in the overall global recovery struggle. Why? Because we have not reached equality. I want to give you make two points or three on this. One, we have had high-level meetings every year since the UNCRPD was passed back in 2007. And I am wondering if we should not be introducing something very similar to what we do in the VNR, which is a voluntary presentation that we introduced to see how people are progressing along the SDGs. We know how many nations, we know over 170 nations have signed the UNCRPD, but we don't truly know what progress they're really making. We need to be able to examine the progress. We know there are mechanisms in place through the CRPD committee in Geneva and so on. But I would love much more for us to do something similar to the VNR, for us to stand up and say, this is the progress we have made. We have domesticated the UNCRPD, and these are the action steps we have taken. And I would like to see that. I would like to see the United Nations, in my second point, take the lead and begin to employ persons with disability in not in roles specific only to disability, but in open employment. That is to say, there is no reason why a person with disability with the capacity shouldn't be appointed to leadership role. If you want true transformation, you got to place persons in very visible positions where they can make an impact and people can begin to see it as normal. My government took a bold step. Everybody says it's bold. It should not have been a bold step, but is defined as a bold step. In 2014, when they appointed me as the ambassador to the United Nations, our highest diplomatic position. And having done that, has created an environment firstly in the Antigua workplace, where colleagues rub shoulders daily with a person with disability and take leadership from a person with disability. Big difference. Where colleagues in the United Nations have made major steps in addressing disability simply because they have a colleague who is disabled and works daily with them with a similar input to them, and so forth. My country also has its deputy head of its legal department is a young woman, a woman with visual impairment. And she too is an example of leadership within that institution and therefore within the government. That is what is going to change how persons view persons with disability. The everyday interaction, the opportunities that are given to everybody, that is what is going to change how persons with disability are truly viewed by colleagues, by the passerby, not to be seen only to deal with a job with disability, because that becomes expected in today's world. People now expect you, if you are dealing with disability awareness, to have a person with disability. And by right, it should, but it is an expected position. But if you had a person with disability as the ambassador, that's not expected. That's creating equal opportunity. That's the drive that we now must take to bring about a true global transformation of persons with disability, true inclusion. So I just want to sum up by saying these 4 small examples of access of human rights that we need to be able to be assured is addressed in our societies is critical. Gender, the challenges of COVID-19, climate, and disability. There are many more intrusions on the lives, the human rights, and the lives of persons in our society, race, color, and religion, many of which are accounted for within the constitutions of most countries, but many of which are not properly policed, if you might, or managed, maybe a better word, as we move forward as a global community. I'm very happy to take questions and to discuss this. I am very honored to be given the opportunity by your team to share my thoughts on human rights and just coming out of Human Rights Day, to be able to look back with you, to ask ourselves, and particularly as young people, and more particularly as young persons with disability, are we making headway? Are we moving forward? And that's the question that we need to be answering as we examine where we are today. I thank you. Hello?
Add window setting, button menu. Shift tab, stop my window, alt plus D button. Shift tab, audio set, shift tab, mute, verbally mute, alt plus A button.
Hello, can you hear me?
Ambassador, we can hear you. Our moderator, Esma, I think is having technical issues, so I'll quickly take over since we do have some questions collected from our members for you. And I will take over and ask one of the questions by UN Youth delegates.
Sure.
Mr. Webson, do you have any challenges in your job which are directly connected to your disability? And If yes, could you share them with us?
Yes, surely I do have challenges in my job that are connected directly to disability. At the United Nations, they are slowly beginning to respond to issues around disability. So I do have issues inside of a major building like the United Nations with mobility. So that's some challenge, but more importantly, you have challenge in meetings, participating in meetings in terms of getting the material in a format that you can truly have available to your fingertips, in my case, right away. They have had to make some changes in the voting procedure so that I can vote independently. And not so much the procedure, but to make it accessible so that I can vote independently. And as I said, in meetings, very often the material is not available in Braille or electronic formats. So I have to fight, push to get that and ask for that, which I shouldn't have to do. It should be automatic because you know that. I would say those are my major challenges in my day-to-day desk work. I have a lot of equipment, so I don't particularly have major challenges because I have learned to adapt a lot. But the key thing, I think the two key things is physical access of buildings like the United Nations, monstrosity of a building, and access to information at the same time as others. I think the biggest thing is you go to meetings, most meetings, and you're given a bunch of print materials, and I cannot read print because I cannot see at all, and no one has thought to get it in Braille or get it in an accessible electronic format. I hope that is helpful.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think Esma is back. Our moderator. She has had some technical difficulties. Esma, can you hear us? Are you with us?
I have to really apologize for my issues with the internet that I had. But thank you, Ambassador Webson, once again, on my behalf as well for the remarks. And I would like to, first of all, underline a few things. One is you have been mentioning how you were nominated as a permanent representative to the United Nations. And I remember back in the years, I think it was 2015 or so very early on. I remember some people have told me here in Georgia when I was still studying at the university that, there is a diplomat who is blind, who has a disability at the UN. And I remember writing about this and expressing concerns that in so many other countries, this has been possible and not in Georgia. And then years later, when I myself was selected as the UN Youth Representative, UN Youth Delegate, and I went to the United Nations, I was reminded by our mission diplomats at the permanent mission of Georgia that you still were an ambassador, and it was a huge source of inspiration for me and interest to get to know you in person and learn about your experience more. And I'm so glad that this actually had happened when I was back then in the UN headquarters. And ever since, your experience has been very instrumental and important for me in my advocacy included. But I also would like to build upon a few other things that you have mentioned in your speech. And one is about addressing the issues of boys and men as a part of gender equality. And this is something that many people overlook, unfortunately, but this is, of course, another part of the coin of gender equality, is that the traditional gender roles and expectations that exist today also are damaging men. For example, when boys are taught that they should not that they should be rebellious and that they should be more individualistic, and not so much obedience to the rules is being expected from them. It is therefore a huge challenge for the boys to study in school and be studious. In the same way, at least I would speak from the Georgian context, 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, to transition and to adapt to the new circumstances. And that is another, that was an effect of the way they were socialized before. While it turned out for women to be easier to adapt to the new realities. Regarding equality, this is a very important topic, and I was, and especially in climate change, but also in vaccine distribution, and in every other aspect. Our world and our earth is like a boat. So if you overload one part of it and you deprive the other, it will turn over eventually, and so can our earth do at some point as well. And therefore we have to do more to redistribute the situation. I just today have heard from the UNDP presence here in Georgia that 100 more million of people fell into extreme poverty, while few thousand billionaires earned additional few trillion dollars in wealth, which again shows how the inequalities are being exacerbated. The issue of climate and disability and intersectionality in general, how is it to be a person with a disability, but also be a person of color at the same time, or belong to ethnic or religious minority I would speak from the Georgian context again, and being a woman at the same time, and so on, or being an IDP person with disabilities, so someone who is internally displaced, or a migrant or refugee, and so on. When we speak about COVID-19 and its adverse effects on climate, this is another issue. I was always wondering how few centuries later, the scientists probably will find all these masks that are made from essentially plastic, which is not super degradable, and they will conclude that there was a pandemic. And of course, there are so many other things that we produce now and consume more that have and will have adverse impact on the environment. And meanwhile, and also we faced, you mentioned that you have been attending the climate summit in Glasgow, and we also faced how inaccessible it was for certain persons with disabilities. And again, from the Georgian context, I would have to really point out that a few years ago, when I mentioned that persons with disabilities should be more involved in environmental issues, one of the major NGO representatives who work on people with disabilities and who has a disability oneself really laughed a lot. But today, it really is in the UN CRPD General Comment number 7. It is in the final report of Catalina de Vandes, of the UN Special Rapporteur on Disabilities, talking about climate change and persons with disabilities and their participation. And meanwhile, I wanted also to ask Ambassador Webson for your position and your opinion on, as one of the participants who have registered for our today's meeting has asked, and you have mentioned this, that the UN should be employing more people with disabilities. What would you say is the major barrier by the UN and other diplomatic missions to employ persons with disabilities, but also how this can be overcome? Should
Okay.
there be, for instance, any quotas?
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me make a couple of comments to your comments and then answer your question. On your first comments about climate and disability. Climate and disability is a real issue because and that's why the agencies and the individuals working or persons who have disability should be engaged in the discussions on disaster relief and the disaster response more than relief, because persons with disability are always the persons who are left behind in a disaster. In a disaster, and persons with disability are amongst the poorest people in the world, and we know disability and poverty has some linkage. So we also need to know that that climate and disability is real. We know that it creates disaster as a result of climate, creates tremendous physical barriers for access, and creates significant barriers around food security. We also know that persons with disability and in the whole climate disaster, if the climate is dealing with relates in droughts, many persons with disability, again, access to water, having to travel long distances or other distances with barriers to access water becomes much more of a problem. So there are all kinds of linkages, and it's real linkages, and we need to be able to look at those. Again, the whole question of intersectionality, as you noted, we cannot see these things in isolation. We got to bring them together. In terms of the Glasgow conference and access, I thought I heard of the Israeli minister who had some difficulty or couldn't get into the building. That I think was an unusual, because I think they did a pretty decent job of making it accessible. So I think once they addressed that question, it was fine. I personally didn't encounter anything. They provided me with a Braille printer. They provided me with all kinds of access opportunities. So I think the British, in this context, did a reasonable job of creating access. And it was unfortunate, whatever happened with, I don't know, because I was trying to find that I didn't, with the Israeli person. But that, and they did a good job of standing up to say, we're not going to do this unless this was done, and it happened. In terms of your question on opportunities and quotas, I don't know that quota always creates the best opportunity, because what quota tends to do very often is that people fill the numbers, as we say. They don't give you the opportunity that best fits your capacity. They need to fill 10%. They fill 10%, but they fill 10% with marginalized jobs and opportunities rather than real jobs and opportunities. So we want to avoid that somehow. I think what the UN has to do is go about making its job opportunities truly accessible through its mechanism, its advertising mechanism, so that person with disability can apply. But not only that you can apply, because very often you may want to apply, but you have the feeling that you're not going to get it. So we have to look at a conscious affirmative action, not quota, but an affirmative action towards placing persons with disability into jobs within the system. So I think that would be one step. But to make that successful, you then have to have strong support mechanism. That is the access, break down the barriers, physical and technical barriers that disallows persons from disability from even taking the affirmative action opportunity. So for me, the two things are affirmative action policy to employ persons with disability, not simply in jobs pertaining to disability, but in opportunities that are available. And secondly, and this is both from headquarters to the country level, and secondly, making the access barriers, physical and others, which maybe include information and so on, making that more available and sensitive. At the national level, national governments needs to make clear advantage of appointing persons with disability within their diplomatic circles. In New York, we now have a woman from Pakistan who is blind. We now had, as you know, we had the ambassador of Mexico for a couple of years. He was visually impaired, and we had a physically disabled chap from, I think, Cuba, who was also in the teams. And the United States has a woman in a wheelchair in their diplomatic caucus as well. So there is some movement being made at the national level. It has to be followed up at the UN headquarters and UN country levels.
It was very interesting to find out. I have never heard of any other diplomats with disabilities around the UN except for you. And it was a very informative for me personally, as well as I'm also involved in activism. And I'm glad that you, Ambassador, have mentioned affirmative action, because many people unfortunately call it here in Georgia so-called positive discrimination, which again it really undermines the importance of this action and undermines its value as of compensating towards the historic inequality that existed before. And yes, this is a very important word. And of course, this is not a discrimination, as some people may say. Another question that we had from one of our participants so I will ask a few more questions that have been written to us in the chat, and then I will ask and allow everyone to unmute yourselves and ask your questions yourselves, please. But one of the questions was, if you as a diplomat, as an ambassador, or before that on your career, on the path of your appointment, had any issues due to your disability, like any additional barriers. You have broadly mentioned that you had to be even better than the best, and I think this is a very good quote. But maybe you could bring us more specifics, because this is what people usually struggle with understanding. What are these additional barriers that exist and that not ability but disability actually constitutes?
Yeah, obviously throughout my career I've had challenges, and I have seen other persons who have had challenges, but I think the key thing is self-advocacy. You have to be a very strong self-advocate. You have to understand the systems into which you either work or trying to get into, and then be a really positive, strong self-advocate. Because your biggest barrier is attitudinal. And that is to say, people's attitude and perception about a person being blind or a person with a disability, as to the many questions they will have about your capacity to access, to function, to get around, to be at the same table, and so on. So you really have to be very strong as an individual, because you will do the normal things that others do, and they would see it as a result of a disability. Very simply put, if you sit down, if I sit down and knock my glass over, my wine glass or water glass, or spill my food or something over, they won't see it as a normal thing that people do from time to time. They see it because I'm disabled. And that has an impact on your overall ability to function. If I get up and say something that is not related, people will first of all begin to identify me by my disability. I was able to become quite identified by my radical views, to be quite honest, that I will challenge anything. I would have challenged the system. So I built a advocacy career around being strong on advocating for change. And it's had nothing, not only disability, but against poverty, because I worked more in that area, but against social change. So I think what you have to do is to be a really positive self-advocate, be confident about what you can do and want to do, and then work at it. You are going to be denied a lot, because it is part of the course, because you're talking about shifting people's attitude. You won't be denied too many times face to face, but you will be denied behind your back, so to speak.
Yes, and Ambassador, also would like to build up on this question and ask you about the youth participation, because this is again another intersectional issues, right? So young people also, some of the young people also do have disabilities, and we as a network of former UN youth delegates to advocate for more involvement of young people in decision making at the international level, for more, to be more specific, for paid internships at the UN level for young people, but also to generally make the international process more democratic, more accepting of young people of different ages, different appearances, and also by promoting the UN Youth Delegate program, because this is one of the tools to amplify the voices of young people. What would you say your country is doing to advance the youth agenda internationally, and what do you think it can do furthermore to include young people, including young people with disabilities, and promote young people with disabilities at the UN level? Because in CRPD committee, for instance, you have mentioned it, that and proposed the VNRs, the national volunteer reviews, but the thing is, countries do report on CRPD implementation, but these reports are not timely reviewed because of the overload of the committee, and the committee unfortunately does not have a lot of members who are young. So what would your suggestions be? How can young persons in general, with and without disabilities, be more participating in international community, in decision making?
Okay. Right. So that's a lot of stuff to unpack there. So I would say, first of all, I would tell you my country had probably the youngest team at the climate change conference. A lot of our participants were young people, tremendous amount, under the age of 28. So we were filled with youth. So that was very proud. I mean, I would say we could extend that to say under the age of 30, 35, 36, but under the age of 30, we were 28, 30. We were on an average, possibly the youngest team in the at the climate change conference. So young people are very engaged in the environmental space in my society, and government pushes, promotes that, and encourages that. And that takes them, and that what that does is create international exposure to these youths. They represent the country, especially in that space, internationally, and they are very fully engaged in representation, and they have been, and that is something we've been doing for the last 5, 7, 8 years or so. So that's highly recognized and highly recommended. There, in terms of actually getting into the UN system, you know, the UNPGA this year has a youth fellowship, and I would be willing to bet that not one youth is a person with disability that is recommended. I am pretty sure that I believe if you did recommend one, they probably would get into the system. In my own country, I didn't find any youth who were interested in international development, but amongst the disability groupings. So that was one. So I mean, the young woman who I spoke of in Liga, she's a little bit above that. So she wouldn't want to do that. But and there, a couple of others I know are over the age of 28, and so they wouldn't be able to qualify. Okay. I also think it is important that there is a YPP exam, a young people's exam for entry into the UN system. And every country should be speaking to everybody about that. And young persons with disabilities should be allowed to take part. I don't know how access, I have a feeling there'll be issue with access, but you won't know that until you present yourself, and then you fight it. And if it doesn't exist. So, but I'm going to look into that myself and see if it's accessible and how it can be readily accessible for persons with disability. But that's one way of getting into the system. And also they are working with all of these agents, UNDP, etc., and pushing it, because they now are beginning to talk about it. We now have to make them implement the talk. But all of them are now talking about opportunities for persons with disability. What the question is, it's, as I have said on the United Nations floor, nobody's going to tell us, nobody's going to give any real strong negative pushback against disability or young people in general, because it's the good thing to support now. The question is implementation and making them implement the talk. So they must, as they say, walk the talk. So I think you as young people have to keep pushing the system, building allies within the system, like myself, and beginning to get your breakthrough through working with your allies, and allies across the board, other young people, as well as allies from who may not be young people, but supportive of the progress for young people, like, as I said, myself.
Well, thank you very much for this answer, Your Excellency, because yes, I mean, applying and attempting, creating social demand by applying to positions that are not necessarily explicitly meant for young people, of persons with disabilities, is one of the very important parts of advocacy, and then expecting and being, of course, qualified and expecting then to be hired. I now would like to give the floor to our participants who are attending and ask any additional questions that you may have. Please unmute yourselves. You can introduce yourselves and ask a question.
I would like to make a comment.
Sure.
When I was young, I grew up actually in the Vietnam era and feel that it was the youth, the young people, who actually managed to stop that war by working together. So the youth can have incredible power. And the other is that the UNDP in Georgia had a call for proposals for disabilities and climate change. And our organization did win that with a proposal to grow trees and use people with disabilities of all levels to actually grow the trees. And from putting them in nurseries. Pardon? So anyway, I just throw that out.
I think we lost Esma due to bad internet connections in Georgia, unfortunately.
Right.
Yes, Ambassador, I have a question also, and since Esma is back, I'll use this opportunity to ask my question.
Ask it, yeah.
It is about the UN Youth Delegate Program expansion. Obviously, this program is one of
sorry, which program?
UN Youth Delegate Program.
Uh-huh.
It is a very precious opportunity for young people to be directly involved in their missions and in the UN decision-making on youth. So having the program in all countries around the world is a very ambitious but important goal, which we as a network of youth delegates are promoting as well. And every time we have ambassadors in our youth and diplomacy talks, we bring up this question: how can we promote UN Youth Delegate Program so that we have it in more countries? And one of our members is from Suriname, and she's a regional ambassador of the network. And she's promoting youth delegate program in CARICOM countries. And with that, I was wondering if it would be possible in the future to establish the UN Youth Delegate Program in Antigua and Barbuda, since from our information, there is no UN Youth Delegate program in your country.
Sorry, there is no
UN Youth Delegate program.
UN Youth. Okay.
So if you could comment on that, that would be really valuable for us to hear from you, how we can bring this program to Antigua and Barbuda, but also to more CARICOM countries, which have some SDG youth ambassadors, but they do not have actual UN Youth Delegate program. Yes.
Okay. Well, well, I think I mean it shouldn't be too difficult to bring it to Antigua if it's promoted through the missions and through the youth Department of Youth and Foreign Affairs on Antigua. So if you were to, I say you could do two things. I don't know the structure, how you guys meet, but if your Suriname regional representative were to write to us or write to Foreign Affairs to establish, and if she or he wanted to visit Antigua and Barbuda to make a representation, the formation of such a group, that would be useful. You would find a lot of interest. The question is who is going to drive it, and if there's a structure between in the youth department and or Foreign Affairs, it can happen. So we do have fellowships within the Alliance of Small Island States where young people come to the United States on youth diplomacy programs, and I would expect that that using those youths would be a good vehicle to get involved. So what I might do is the fellowship starts early next year, is to get one of your people to speak to the fellows about that particular program and your engagement. So if Ezra or yourself could write us about it, we could see how we could help to facilitate further pushing it in the region, at least among small island states, not just in the region.
Ambassador, that sounds like a wonderful outcome of our youth and diplomacy talk today, because our delegate from Suriname, Charmaine Panza, would love to help you out. And also our group here, as I said, we all have experience of driving the program in our countries, and we would love to share our knowledge and experience to help have more UN youth delegates. So that sounds like a really good plan, and we will definitely reach out to your office after this call with more information.
No problem.
Well, thank you, Lika, for this question, because again, one of our missions is to increase youth participation at the UN level, including through promotion of the UN Youth Delegate Program, which exists since 1980s. It's a UN-based initiative, and then it encourages it encourages the states to, of course, it's something that the member states are usually establishing, and it encourages the member states to encourage and to establish the UN Youth Delegate Program, which essentially means appointing a young person. Again, the appointment process varies from country to country, or persons. Also, the amounts usually vary from country to country, to serve as the youth representatives to the UN. In different countries, the mandates also vary, but usually it consists of, first of all, meeting local youths within the country, and then going to the United Nations and speak at different fora there on behalf of the youth of a given country. So, for instance, most of the UN youth delegates speak at the UN General Assembly, also at the UN ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council. Some of them are also speaking at the high-level political forum on SDGs and other international processes. And some of the young persons, including me and Lika and the Georgian youth delegates, for instance, have a diplomatic seat at the assembly, at the General Assembly, and they are allocated a diplomatic slot to actually present their speech. And this is one part of the UN Youth Delegate Program. I also see that Lika wants to ask another question, and Lika, please do it. We still have up to 10 minutes for our meeting.
Thank you, Esma. It will be a quick question actually, and it's a good ending question. So that's why I wanted to ask it to the ambassador by the end of our meeting. We usually like to end on an inspirational note, and there is so much that you talked about, Ambassador, that I took notes of, and I'm sure our audience and Esma as well, a lot of things to take into consideration and think about. And to end, I have two questions. I have a question to you about what would you tell yourself when you were roughly our age? We are all roughly 25, 30 years old here, and obviously we're young leaders from our countries who are idealistic enough to believe that we can make change in our areas. We're all active in different areas and different SDGs, some more in peace building, others more in disability rights, others in climate and gender. We have a very big spectrum of young leaders in this network. And it will be very useful to hear about what would you tell your younger self, because I feel like you also had similar dreams, aspirations, and obviously it was a difficult road. And it will be inspirational and useful for us and our audience to hear about your message, and also a message to all young people, especially to young people with disabilities, from you, Ambassador. Would be interesting ending of our conversation.
That's a really good question. So, so the question is, what would I tell myself if I were to go back?
Yes.
If I were
fine.
your age,
Yes.
and I could say, what did I tell myself? Like all young people at that age, if you are truly engaged, you are idealistic. You do believe you can change the world. And I certainly at that time felt that I needed to make a mark. At that age, for me, I needed to be able to change what it meant to be a person with disability, and to change the social barriers that created poverty, because both of which I was inflicted by, poverty and disability. And at that age, I felt I had to do that. It was a different world. Now, today, if I were a younger Aubrey Webson, with some of the tools that I have, such as the UNCRPD, and a little more global, a slightly more global focus on disability, but yet a more restricted focus, I would be very interested in telling myself that I would be engaged in, again, not now just changing. I would continue the disability fight. I will continue to begin to position persons with disability into the broader society in a way that can change what it means to have a disability. I would be I'm not sure a lot would have changed from what I would have been, from what I was, because I would be very much an activist for social change, and that would involve environment, which didn't involve in my youth as much, but it would involve environment and would involve achieving the objectives of the social charter, which is the SDG. So I don't know, if I were to go back, I would continue the fight for equal opportunity and social change. I will continue the major fight that persons with disabilities still has, but the fight would be different. I would be looking at opportunities, and advocating for attitudinal change, but the changes that you want now is different from the changes of 15, 20 years ago. You have accomplished the UNCRPD, you have accomplished things. You now have tools to fight with that you didn't have before. And I would be learning how to use those tools as part of my armory in my advocacy. It is the advantage today for the 25-year-old is that you have the tools, you have the focus, you have a social, you have a global communication network that is way in advance. And it is using the tools to bring the change rather than creating, rather than trying to create the change for, create the tools for the change. So I would say that now.
Thank you very much.
That would be it. I see Robin from Sweden is asking a question, which Ezra, I could answer. She
Yes.
was asking.
Yes, I was just going to verbalize what was asking, what the person was asking, and that was what life lesson has it taught to you to be a diplomat, and what have you learned throughout your professional career and professional life?
Well, there are lots of lessons I've learned in this diplomatic world. I mean, it certainly is different from looking in from the outside. That's for sure. The politics of social, the politics is very different from just being an activist. So I would say I would look at it at two levels: one as a person with disability, and one as a diplomat. As a person with disability, one of the things that I have certainly learned is that you, no matter where you are, we are still at the point in our social, in our global community where a person with disability, regardless of their what they have proven and shown, you are constantly, you're still constantly fighting attitudes, even amongst your peers, attitudes of acceptance and attitudes of being able to, that you still have to prove that you are amongst the best. And so that continues as a lifelong lesson and a lifelong experience. And it takes a lot more energy than it would for the non-disabled person, because you have to continuously do that. So that's one thing that I know, that I feel more of us would change if there were more of us in this open space. The second thing is more political and is more germane to anybody who is working in diplomacy. Of course, the higher you go in the ladder of any organization, is the more difficult it is to, the more difficult to make decisions, the more heavy the weight of decisions are, and you have to have a major your exterior of dealing with this thing. You've got to learn to compartmentalize a lot. You have to be able to compartmentalize what is important, what is not, how you're making these decisions, what is it based on. And that is something that you learn with experience, I believe. But you have to learn that as you advance in society, whether as you advocate for opportunities, when those opportunities break, it comes with a significant amount of responsibility. And how you deal with that responsibility will define you and define the society that you work on behalf of. So my defining of those responsibilities is going to help to define persons with disabilities as much as it defines people of color, as much as it defines me as a person. So I suppose those aren't inspirational words. They are just what I consider to be truths.
Well, thank you very much for this openness, Your Excellency. And yes, I can sign to many of these things. And I would have said that I already do regret some things, including the fact that I was not probably super active at a university level, advocating for more inclusion there. I was just studying and doing all the activities outside where it was probably more comfortable. And this is what the lesson we should all learn is that the missed opportunities are the ones that we actually will regret, the things that we did not do rather than things that we
But
did
Ezra,
do.
let me just say something to you about that. To say that I don't think you need to regret these things because a lot of these things are defined by the time and space that that your life is dealing with. We're all dealing with different things. Some of us make life sacrifices that affects everybody. Some of us, based on our personal circumstance in life at a particular time, make decisions based on that. So I don't think you need to regret. It's just that you are now seeing things differently because your circumstances different.
Thank you very much for ending on this positive note. And yes, we have all a lot to do in terms of both disability and youth empowerment and all other issues. And some countries have done more than the others. Unfortunately, well, that's the reality. And those that have not have to really catch up because and as the first countries that started this progress, we do not have you know, as many years as they did. We do not have hundreds of years and decades to catch up on these and not feel this inequality anymore. So thank you very much. I would wish you personally a very good luck in all your efforts professionally, personally, and a lot of success as a diplomat, as representing your country. And I would thank all the participants who attended and asked the questions for contributing to our discussion. And I will end here and close our today's meeting once again with thank you and with hope for the fact that there will be more and more of us who would be breaking the stereotypes and practice the breaking of the stereotypes and breaking this inequality from which many people do suffer and therefore create the social demand, which will in turn result in more equality around the world and more as including and addressing each other's needs and being us more considerate of others' needs. Thank you very much once again, and have a good rest of the day and a good weekend.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so very much, and we'll be in touch. Thanks. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll be in touch.